I was driving across the country with my mom and sister. I was 16, my sister was 20. It was late, but we were still alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. At the gas station, there was a van full of teenagers on a road trip, and a small gray car parked in front of us with two young men standing outside of it. Everything felt wrong when we got there. We had been to many rest stops at night, but none had felt like this. My mom and sister went inside while I stayed in the car. I overheard the teenagers saying they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work. They left in a hurry. I watched the car in front of us. The two men hadn't moved at all. They stood there, still as statues. They weren't talking or on their phones. They were just still. When my mom and sister came running back, the men slowly turned to look at us without moving the rest of their bodies. Their eyes, they were completely black, not reflecting any light, just empty. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we reached the next city. When we tried to find that place again, it didn't exist. It wasn't on any map. We even asked locals, but no one knew about any rest stop in that area. We've driven the same route since, but that rest stop is gone. We were driving through a massive graveyard in my friend's old Subaru. After stopping, we walked down a hill and came across a small pond. On the other side, we noticed someone sitting on a rock. The figure was all black, with no distinguishable features, except for an old-style top hat. We waved and shouted, "Hi!" But he didn't move. He sat still, staring straight ahead. Then, out of nowhere, he jumped to his feet and ran across the water. And halfway across, he vanished. We ran back to the car, but it wouldn't start. Then, we heard banging on the back of the car. It wasn't constant, but it came every few seconds. We looked outside, but no one was there. Something was hitting the car, but we couldn't see it. Our phones had no service. For the next 30 minutes, we tried to get the car started, and eventually, it roared to life. As soon as we crossed the cemetery gates, our phones lit up with service again. I know one thing for sure. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car to drive the 35 miles to town. About 3 miles outside of town, I saw someone flagging me down. It was Jim, a guy I'd gone to school with. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he looked just the same. He got in the car, and we talked as I drove. I asked if he wanted to grab a drink at the VFW, but he said, "Just take me home." Jim's parents had lived close by, but he directed me to the outskirts of town, near a mobile home park. When we got to the turnoff, he asked to be dropped off, said it was good to see me, and walked off into the night. At the reunion, I mentioned seeing Jim. The room went silent. My cousin went pale and told me, "Jim died 8 years ago. He rolled his car on that same road." I stepped outside, feeling dizzy, and found a newspaper sitting on the passenger seat. The date? 8 years ago. It had Jim's obituary. My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He spent most nights driving the perimeter, checking empty buildings. One night, while parked on a hill, he felt a thumping in his body, like the heavy bass of a song. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw a group of Native Americans walking behind the truck, right through it. He jumped out of the truck, gun drawn, but realized they weren't real. They were ghosts. Many of them looked injured, marching through the spot where he had been sitting. The procession disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. When he tried to talk about it with another guard, the man refused to discuss it. He'd seen the same thing before, but he didn't believe in ghosts. I was driving home late one night after visiting a friend in a rural part of the state. The roads were empty, and the only sounds were the hum of my car's engine and the occasional chirp of crickets from the trees. As I made my way through a particularly desolate stretch, I spotted a figure on the side of the road, an older man with his thumb out, clearly hitchhiking. I know better than to pick up strangers, especially at that hour, but something about him seemed desperate, so I pulled over. The man got in without a word and settled into the back seat. His clothes were worn, and his face was pale, almost translucent. I tried making small talk, asking where he was headed, but he remained silent, staring blankly ahead. Unease crept over me as the air in the car grew colder. Minutes later, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing. He had vanished. My heart raced as I pulled over and frantically searched the back seat. It was empty. The hitchhiker had simply disappeared. Shaken, I sped home, trying to shake off the growing fear. A day later, I mentioned the incident to a coworker, and when I described the hitchhiker, he was shocked and told me there was a story about a man who had died in a car accident on that very stretch of road years ago. Locals said he still tries to hitch rides home, but he never makes it there. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated.